Welcome to Silverstone Technology Cluster's Ask the Expert podcast. Today's episode is proudly brought to you by TC Group. I'm Jeannie, your host, and we are joined by Charles Ross-Smith. Charles is here from Pointer Consultancy Group, so thank you for joining us today, Charles.
Great to be here, and thank you for the invite.
So can we start by getting to know you a little bit better? Do you mind telling us a little bit about your background and what led you to your current role at Pointer's Consultancy Group?
So my background's an aeronautical engineer by training, and my early career started working with the Ministry of Defence, buying air-to-air refueling aircraft and working in flight sims. And then just wanted a bit more challenge, so then got into engineering consultancy, and then moved from kind of system engineering into large program management, complex change management, and bid and proposal management, and then realized actually really enjoying this, but I kind of want to put something back. So luckily kind of met my co-founder at a similar sort of time, and he was very much of a similar mindset of let's do something better, let's help SMEs. So we set up Pointer about 6 years ago to again try and use our expertise of large companies and just trying to help SMEs understand what it means and grow from that point.
Oh, that's brilliant. So getting into the discussion for today, what inspired you to get started with sustainability as a business, and what were the first steps to becoming more sustainable?
So from the outset, my business partner and I, Richard, really kind of want to try and put something back and kind of be a bit purpose-led. So I think part of that was also understanding what impact as a company we had on society and the world, and therefore it's trying to make sure we were doing things right from an environmental perspective. So one of the first things I had to work out was how do I buy sustainable notebooks? What does that mean? Should they be recycled? Should they be durable? And all this sort of stuff. So as a small company, I didn't really know where to go or what to look at. So that was the first step of trying to understand everything we do. How can we do the right thing from a sustainability perspective? Yeah, if that makes sense.
Okay. So how did you go about learning more about what sustainability means as an SME?
So I did a lot of Googling to try and understand, again, about notebooks or kind of around energy choices and the rest of it. And at which point, effectively, I came across the organization called B Corp, which is trying to help set the bar and set the standards for companies to be purpose-led. And this is just a really useful guide of what it means across various pillars in terms of environmental sustainability, governance, your impact in society, and how you treat your workforce. And that was actually quite a good bar to then go, actually, if we work with other B Corp companies, then that's probably a good threshold to say they are doing things right from a sustainability perspective. But initially, it was quite interesting kind of looking into that, what is this standard? Is it an ISO standard? Is it international? And where's it come from? So it's quite interesting understanding the pedigree, which was basically a group of individuals trying to do things right and set this bar because there was a vacuum in the world around that piece.
Okay, and from the journey you've taken, what 3 bits of advice would you give to SMEs wanting to start their journey to sustainability?
I think the first thing is trying to understand what it means to you as a company. I think you only get more sustainable if you bring your whole people with you. So it's really important that as a team, you sit down and have a talk about what it means to you. What are your values? How much do you want to do with this, and how can you balance off wanting to grow as a company with your sustainability impact, and how do you get those things working in concert rather than antagonistic? So I think that's the first thing, is kind of work out what sustainability means to you. Then I think it's get the data, so understand what is your carbon footprint, what impact do you have, are you a service business, do you have a product, what is your impact on the environment? And from having that data, then you can then focus on your hotspots of which are the few things we should target on. I think lots of people feel a bit sort of maxed out or tilted, so where do I start, what can I do? And I think the real bit of advice is get the data and just focus on 3 to 5 things initially, and that will have an impact. And then you start to build that impetus behind you, and you can go from there. But I think just that focus on those 3 to 5 things will really help you kind of get down that path and that journey.
Okay, so looking at it from a financial point of view, what advice would you give to startups and SMEs on factoring sustainability when they're bootstrapping, when they're working with limited budget?
So with a kind of my background as a system engineer, I learned early on it's really important to try and understand what the long-term impact of early decisions is, and trying to, where you can, make sure you don't preclude paths or routes down to it. So I think the key I'd advise is understand, especially if you're doing a product, how can you build in some certain bits of sustainability from the outset in terms of circular design principles, or do you understand what your supply chain is and where the recycling is? I think the other thing I'd also advise is there's a lot of free resource out there. There's an awful lot of stuff you can find on the internet, and there are also really good communities, especially around B Corp, of people who want to help. So I think reach out to your networks and see what advice is out there to kind of help you get that kind of free start of some of those frameworks. Do look at B Corp, but I think the main thing is, as you're designing, try and think ahead about when you do get more money, what can you do to invest more in sustainability and keep those pathways open.
Okay, so speaking of frameworks, are there any recognised standards or frameworks for sustainability that can help provide some guidance or benchmarks for SMEs?
So there are quite a range, and I think it is getting better, because originally there were lots of frameworks that were targeted to big organisations, understanding has had bigger impact, but more and more there is kind of trying to help understand what that means for a smaller company. So I think I've already mentioned B Corp as one, as a really good framework to kind of see what it means from purpose-led. But there are other things around carbon footprinting, such as the Science-Based Target Initiative, which again, SMEs can use as a baseline to understand what are they doing on the net zero journey. What should they be targeting? How can they baseline their scopes and where they should go? So I think those are the kind of two initial main frameworks to look at. But I think I definitely, as an SME, B Corp is probably the most accessible, and especially because it opens up a nice community of other small SMEs who are also kind of work together. I think for me that was the nice thing about that community piece.
Okay, so when we're talking about sustainability, what is climate risk, and when should organisations factor this into their planning?
So climate risk is understanding what impact climate change is going to have on your business. So it's trying to model over long term, so 2050 and beyond, with different climate scenarios, what's that going to mean to your business across the piece? So that's in terms of your supply chain, your actual facilities infrastructure, and your people. Is there a flood risk? I really like my coffee, and speak with quite a few specialty coffee roasters, and they are very concerned about, are there beans no going to be able to be produced with climate change? So it's really trying to do, again, database, do some scenario modeling across what your business does in terms of outputs, your finance, your people, and your supply chain, as I said, and then see with the different kind of long-term scenarios what impacts and risks might be introduced, and trying to plan now early about what you can do to mitigate those risks. Don't build on a floodplain, or diversify your supply chain. Understand again what your consumers might want in 15 years if summers are longer or different, and again, do it from the data to understand what you can do to mitigate it.
Okay, so finally, and you've already touched on this, is there anything else that businesses should and can do about climate risk as SMEs?
I think it's just consider it at this early stage. And again, similarly with sustainability, it's much easier to try and factor in climate risk at the outset than it is later on. I think it's also really important to get support. We're partnering with a company called Redlines who are doing the kind of scenario modeling to again get that data approach of, well, how big is this risk and when's it like to impact. I think that's the other important thing about climate change, is it's not all next year, it might be 5 years or 10 years, and therefore it's that progressive approach of, if you've got a building, you probably need to worry about that in 20 years time. If you're replacing the outside of the building every 5 years, you probably don't need to worry until the second iteration of refurbishment. So I think it's get the data, baseline it, and then work out when do you need to worry about it and when do you need to start impacting it. But I think the main thing is to actually start considering it now, because it will potentially have a greater impact than you think on your business, but also it can potentially be an enabler. As always, risk is a two-sided coin of opportunity and threat, and therefore you might be able to diversify your supply chain or reach into new markets, or it might be the initiative to kind of set up a new facility or look elsewhere that might drive it. So I think look early and drive from the data is the advice I'd give.
And as a consultancy group, what is your process when you get sort of SMEs come to you and say, we want to talk about sustainability, we want to do more? What process do you take them through, and how does it work?
So the first process is really to understand why they're asking the question and what does sustainability mean to them, and effectively try and understand that kind of high level strategy behind them to go, what do you achieve? What does good look like for you in 10 years time from a sustainability perspective? Then it's kind of having set that vision for what they want to be from a sustainability perspective. It's then help them with a bit of analysis, understand what are the steps to achieve that, come up with a detailed plan, and then help them really start with some of those early quick wins. Change management, in my view, a lot of the sustainability journey is effectively change management. So it's trying to help bring your team and your people along. So there's a lot about that, making sure you're communicating well with your team, you come up with that communications plan, and some of those early quick wins that kind of make you feel you're making progress to then kind of build some of the more tricky stuff. So it's really that, get the vision, help them come up with a credible plan, set the route with early kind of goals to kind of measure that progress, and then make sure they got the review in place to see what else they could be doing more, or kind of recalibrate to make sure that they are having the impact they want and doing the right things as a company.
That sounds great. Thank you so much for your time today, Charles. It's been really, really interesting, and it's great to understand what sustainability means and how what can help with that process, because it's so important.
Thank you for the opportunity. I think for me, it's something I'm very passionate about, and it's been really interesting for us as a company coming from a non-sustainability background and learning because we want to, and then seeing other SMEs similarly having that challenge and trying to help them along. And I think the nice thing to me about the sustainability community is that everyone's very mutually supportive. We recognise it's a big issue, and it's just really nice that even when we talk with companies who might be perceived as competitors, actually it's more around allyship and how can we work together to tackle this bigger challenge. So I think it's a nice community to be involved in. I'd definitely recommend SMEs trying to reach out to their wider network and help grow and do the right things.
Well, that's fantastic. So to all of our listeners and viewers, thank you for tuning in to today's episode. Be sure to subscribe to STC's podcast and stay tuned for future episodes.